Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back and welcome to this review of the Oathmark Elf Cavalry produced by Northstar. And as with all of my elf reviews so far, this one was sent to me courtesy of Northstar for review purposes, so huge thanks to them for sending this our way to take a look at together. And if you've not seen those other reviews, I've now done two in addition to this one, which are the elf infantry, the medium infantry, and then the elf heavy infantry. And I do recommend you at least give them a skim if you haven't watched those, because I'll probably be making some references to them throughout the course of this review. There's also a fourth kit in the range, which we'll review down the road at some point, which is their elf light infantry, and they're going to be releasing a elf light cavalry set at some point down the road. So if you're not familiar with Oathmark, it's a game, a mass battles fantasy game produced by Osprey, and then the official miniatures for it are, of course, made by Northstar. And the thing that I love so much about it is kind of alluded to on the cover art here. It's something I've talked about with all of these reviews, which is their art design is just so refreshing. It harkens to like 70s and 80s fantasy art, and you can juxtapose it with World of Warcraft, even modern Games Workshop, Mantic, sort of high concept fantasy, which involves usually a lot of like weirder proportions on things like weapons, shoulder pads. Sometimes you have floating crystals and stuff. It really leans into the like magical element of things, almost blending the line between fantasy and sci-fi. And I think that's totally legitimate. I absolutely see a lane for that. And I think the bigger concern for me is just that market's kind of saturated at this point, and that there's just so few alternatives that do designs like this, which are really rooted in like medieval arms and armor. Really, if you squint at it, it almost looks like it could have existed at some point in history. I saw one of the comments in the prior videos mentioned the term grounded fantasy, which I like a lot more than trying to like leverage high or low fantasy, which are terms that a lot of different groups can't even agree on definitions for. So I like that because it really points to what this is, which is kind of a grittier, more realistic approach to fantasy. And I really appreciate that Northstar in the entirety of the Oathmark range have stuck to that design. So this is now the cavalry installation within this range of kits that we've taken a look at. 15 models within this box, which is cool because normally there are 12 that come in sets of this price point in plastic. So as with all of these kits, I've taken out the contents so that I could take some notes on what is inside. And what you're going to be greeted with when you open the box are 6 plastic sprues, or gray plastic sprues I should say, and then 3 of these Renager flats. These, unlike the infantry sets, which come with 25 by 25 millimeter squares, these are 25 by 50 rectangles, which makes sense because of course the horses are slightly larger. So if you're not familiar with my reviews, very briefly, what we're going to do is take a look at some examples of these sprues in detail. I'm going to give you breakdowns on the bits. We're going to assemble some figures. I want to do some kit bashing specifically with those other elf kits. And we're going to do some scale comparisons with other cavalry models that I have in my collection from different manufacturers, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So as these are 3 sprues repeated, again 15 models broken up as 5 riders on each sprue, 3 sprues apiece, and 5 horses on each sprue, 3 of those as well. I can give you one of each of those, and then we'll take a look at them up close. So I suppose let's start with the horse sprue, because that's the simpler of the two. And we'll do a front and back shot here. And from a production standpoint, I think they look fantastic. The molds all look very clean, minimal mold lines. And then I think the sculpting all looks really solid too, like on things like the folds here, like the mane. I suppose the only thing that jumps out at me, and I really won't be able to get a good feel for this until I assemble some of them, is that the horse bodies look a little bit muscular to me, especially like these hindquarters here. Some of the muscles up here, while well defined, they just look a little like beefy. So we'll see if that's true. I really won't be able to tell until I have some of these assembled next to some other cavalry models in this scale. But otherwise, yeah, I love all the little details on them. I'm sure some people are going to be upset that these tassels are attached to the heads. It does look like they'd be pretty easy to just snip off for what it's worth. Very selfishly, I suppose, I'm glad they did this, because if they were optional, I would have attached them anyway. And I imagine that would have been kind of difficult to do from a production standpoint, but I'm sure some people would have preferred them to be detached. But I think that the sculpting looks fantastic for whatever that's worth. And then it looks like what they've done here is a pretty simple letter system. Yeah, it looks like, so you have like body D, tail D, and head D would all go together, so that makes assembly very straightforward, I think. And from glancing at it, I think we have 3 head variants. They're similar looking, but it looks like they're leaning in different directions. One has a mouth slightly open, one closed. So, as I said, I really won't know for sure until I assemble some of these. I'll do some dry fitting, and I'll report back once I have some of these put together. But I think this is great, very effective, straightforward sprue. Again, 5 horses per sprue. You get 3 of them, 15 horses per kit. So let's take a look at this rider sprue here. I'll do a shot of the front and back. And the production is all the same. It looks fantastic. These are all made by Renadra. Again, designed by Northstar for a game made by Osprey, but the boxes are actually produced by Renadra, who consistently do really good work. So everything looks very clean and well done. So from a design standpoint, what these look like, and I suppose are, at least based on the naming convention, is mounted medium elf cavalry, right? So Northstar does a really good job across the entirety of the Oathmark range of producing a light, medium, heavy version of their infantry sets. We see that in the elves, of course. We see it in their dwarf range, their orcs and goblins. So humans, they have a heavy or heavy human infantry set coming out here, I think, next. So and that denotes not only the weapons that they're going to come with, because they follow a pattern with all of these sets, but also the armor, with light infantry having none, heavy infantry having a mix of plate and mail, and then medium infantry having usually just mail. So I say all of that because from looking at it from a design standpoint, what we essentially have are a mounted version of their medium elf infantry set, for whatever that's worth. Again, I'm sure some would have preferred maybe like a heavier set. I did mention at the beginning they're going to be putting out a light cavalry set, which I imagine is going to have like no armor, maybe some cloaks and hooded options like for the heads, some bows. But this really is, if I bring the sprue in here just to show you side by side, this really is like a mounted version of their elf infantry. And again, I'll look at all these bits up close here, but you'll see like even the armor design here is totally identical to the torsos here. So anyway, with that aside, I just wanted to be clear that that's what we're looking at here. There's no like heavy lance option or polearm options within this. This really is just a mounted version of their infantry set. So let's take a look at some of the details here. I mentioned the rider bodies up here. This is one of the few kits that I've seen outside of, I think, really just like Games Workshop does this, or used to do this, which is the detached torso leg combo. I had actually seen somebody in the comments of a prior video asking like who else is doing that, and very few companies outside of, again, early Games Workshop kits do this. So it's cool to see that Oathmark is carrying on that tradition. It's a little tricky to do when there's cloth involved, but with these chainmail bodies, I think it works well, because you don't have any kind of irregular folds that wouldn't look quite right with the torsos twisting. But what it allows you to do is get some slightly different poses out of these guys just by tilting the bodies in slightly different directions. So that's pretty cool to see. It looks like the legs are all duplicates of one another, but it's fine. Again, a lot of that's going to be covered up by the saddle and the horse anyway. And the torsos all have these slightly different glyphs, but it mirrors, as I said, what we saw on the infantry set. Heads, I do want to point out specifically, are different to the infantry. There's 10 heads across each sprue. And again, there are 3 rider sprues per set, so you're going to end up with 30 heads in the kit. So 5 of them are unarmored, and I do once again want to bring in that infantry set. This is again their medium infantry, which is just called infantry, and you can see that the heads are different, which is cool because that even just means that you could use some of the heads from the medium infantry set in the cavalry set if you wanted a whole bunch of them to have different heads, or you could take some of these unarmored heads and use them on your infantry if you wanted to. I think I think that really is the way to go with Oathmark. If you're planning to do an army, pick up several boxes, like the different boxes, just because everything is so interchangeable, and it makes each of these boxes, I think, exponentially better when you do that. There are 5 armored options here, and those heads I actually think I like better than the infantry version. So again, we'll go to the armored heads here, which kind of look like 5th edition wood elves. The like metal glade guard heads is what that reminds me of. Whereas these are starting to veer into like sea guard, maybe. But I think that these work very nicely for cavalry models. Slightly larger helm. So yeah, so 10 heads per sprue, 3 sprues per kit, so you're going to end up with 30 across the set. As I mentioned, let's talk about arms, because this is one point that I don't mean to just keep bringing the infantry sprue in, but this is where things start to get duplicated from the infantry sprue. So they don't really have lances. You could call them light lances, I suppose, if you want, but these are spears, and I can say that confidently because they're the same sculpts as what we see on the infantry set, right? So there are 6 spears, and as I just said, they're the same 6 spears that you'll find in the infantry set. There might be one that's different, and there is. It's this one here, which is in like a stabbing pose, which makes sense because he's like stabbing down from horseback. But the other 5 can be found in the infantry set. I also kind of view that as a feature, to be honest with you. It's going to not only create uniformity across the army between your infantry and your cavalry, but in the case of like RPGs or skirmish level games, or like middle or strategy battle game, being able to have a mounted and a foot version of the same figure essentially is pretty cool. So again, 6 spears here. There are 5 of which are found in the infantry set. There are then 6 sword arms, all of which I think are found in the infantry set. Again, this is the sword design from the medium infantry, and not, if I lean across my workstation here, not the sword design that can be found in the heavy infantry set. So again, like here are the newer swords that they're doing for, this is the heavy elf infantry. And I mentioned I want to do some kit bashing when I'm putting these figures together too, just to see how everything blends together. But so some arming sword options down here. They're less like of that leaf design, more of just like a standard arming sword. Some up here, and there's one sword that is a left-handed option as well. So 7 swords total, again, one of which is going in the opposite hand. The shields that you see scattered around here are also shields from the infantry. Going back to my point, again, look at the design, like the cutouts on these. It's the same cutouts that you'll see here. But as I was just saying, going back to foot and mounted versions of a model, you have the option for that here too. Same daggers that you see scattered around here. Again, sticking with accessories for a second. What is different is the inclusion of these tassels that you see here. And I'll see how those attach, I imagine, going onto these metal helmets here. Those aren't included in the infantry versions. Those have like feathers instead of the tassels, but I think that's a neat inclusion. And then they also have, I shouldn't say this is unique, but they have these detached pouches. And the reason for that, again, if you're trying to have a foot and mounted version of a figure, is because the infantry models have pouches sculpted on. So they don't have them as loose accessories, whereas here you would have to just attach them on if that's something you wanted to do. And then left arms for the shields. And there you go, that rounds out the sprue. I think it's effective. I think it's, I don't use the word literally lightly, but it is a literal mounted version of the medium infantry set. So let's cut here. I want to assemble some of these figures and we'll see how they all look. Alright, so I figured something out with the horses that I wanted to share because I found it to be very clever. And I mentioned there was the lettering system that's on the horse sprue, that if you wanted to just follow the letters, like keep all the A pieces together, you can have unique horse A, follow B, C, D, etc. What I found is actually happening here is that the left and right sides of the bodies are 5 unique poses each that they've then mirrored to make a right and left side. So for example, like this piece here, right, is this piece over here, just mirrored. So you can see here, if I put them together, you're going to have kind of like a dance move horse there. What's really cool about this, though, not only is I think it's very smart to do things that way, but what's awesome about this is that every single one of these is interchangeable. You could pick any left side and put it with any right side, and it's going to match up. And what that means is that while you could, follow their recommended pattern, because again, those like A horse, B horse, C horse, D horse, whatever you want to pick, are going to make unique horses. But what you could also do is just ignore it completely and mix and match. So without even touching like heads, for example, just with 5 unique left sides and 5 unique right sides, that's 25 unique horse combinations that you can make just from the horses. So again, you could ignore the sprue entirely, the recommendations, and if you wanted to like actually map it out on a grid, you can make 25 unique horse body combinations, because every single one of these is interchangeable. And I don't think I've ever seen that before, and I find that to be very cool. So I just wanted to share that before I throw some of these figures together. Alright, so I have some of these assembled. I'll say that they were some of the easiest horses I think I've ever put together. It was just those 4 pieces per horse, and everything went together very smoothly, minimal cleanup. I'll say here, while we have an overhead shot, before I show you the assembled figures, that I do think these are on the larger side. It's not egregiously so, but they are, the height, you'll see, like this is a Perry historical plastic horse on the right, which is probably the most extreme comparison I can do, because those are going to look kind of like ponies by comparison. But you'll see that they don't look totally out of place. The height is about correct. It's more just the thickness of things like the muscles, especially in the hindquarters and the neck. So, and we have to give a little bit of leeway here, because these are intended as fantasy horses, right? This is a Victrix figure on the right. These are fantasy horses as opposed to historical, so they have a little more license to play around with things like proportions, but just something to be aware of. I do think these are on the like larger warhorse side of things. If you're looking for something a little bit more maybe svelte for elven cavalry, these are going to be a little bit thicker. So let's take a look at some of these assembled models. I'll go kind of in order of assembly here. So I have failed to mention that there's actually an 11th head on the sprue, and there's a little command cloak option and a banner pole when I was doing the sprue review. So there are 11 heads per sprue. I'll put a little note there too in case anybody's just zipping through. But here's that command head there, and I think they look fantastic, all assembled. As I said, when they're isolated, I don't really have any issue with the horse anatomy or anything like that. It is just when you have them right up next to a more lean, historical-looking horse, they look slightly more brutish, I think. But on their own, I think they look cool. And I really love the design. So again, this is all out of the cavalry set, no conversion work here yet. But here's one using some bits from the infantry set. So the infantry set does come with the advantage of bows. And so I harvested some of the bow options. This is a head and feather option. That makes it kind of convincing Illyrian Reaver, I think, if you're looking to do something like that. And then here's using some bits from the heavy cavalry set. So the head and arm and sword scabbard are from the heavy cavalry, or heavy infantry, excuse me. So I think that looks pretty neat, especially that face mask helm. I think the like the floral pauldrons and armored bracers that come with it benefit these models too. And then here's another example of heavy infantry bits. So both those arms, this is one of the sword arms from the heavy infantry, and then the head, which has this kind of like chainmail koi for neck guard coming down off of it, I think also look pretty cool. So yeah, all in all, I think these really look fantastic all assembled, and because of Oathmark's natural ability to blend kits together, it benefits, I think, immensely from having access to those other kits in order to do some kit patching. So let's do some proper scale comparisons here. I'll drop it on the Lazy Susan and we'll see how they all stack up. Alright, here we go. So I've got some miniatures spinning around here just to show you how they all scale up. I'll call them out as they go. I will say here that I think the scale's fine. It really is just that they're maybe slightly more heroically proportioned than if you've only dealt with like 28mm historical figures, these are just going to be a little bit beefier. But you can see that the height is fine. I think they all blend together without any issue if that's something that you're looking to do. Just be aware these are on the slightly more fantasy side of the sliding scale, if you will. So I'll call them out again as they spin through the center. Anything with a green base, of course, is the Oathmark Elf range. So let's start here in the middle. We've got a Fireforge Knight, Medieval Knight. This is a Games Workshop 5th edition. They use that horse body up through like 6th edition, 7th edition as well, but I think that one specifically is from 5th. We have a Victrix Medieval Knight there. And we have a Perry mounted men-at-arms from their War of the Roses line. That one's actually the same as the one we saw earlier, just has the barding option. This is one of the new War Games Atlantic Medieval Knights. And then we're spinning back to Fireforge. So what's the final verdict? I think this is a really solid kit. I mean, putting aside any grievances about, horse muscle size, I think these are beautiful figures once you get them all assembled. And if you've already got some Oathmark elves in your collection, I think these are going to blend right in. This is definitely worth picking up, even just to round out your collection there. Yeah, could it have been, I think, slightly improved had it been done in the style of the heavy infantry, right, with like a steel plate cuirass, some more of the styling that we see on the heavy infantry. Yeah, probably, especially once the light cavalry come out. I think that we're going to want to see more of a distinction between the 2 cavalry sets as opposed to the 3 infantry sets. But I think this is a really good addition to their range, very good to have, and I think there's just so much kit bash potential as the kit currently sits. And on that note, if you're considering picking this up and you don't have any Oathmark stuff in your collection, I would strongly recommend you consider picking up at least one of the infantry sets to do some of the kit bashing that I had shown earlier in this review, both because it makes both of those sets just so much exponentially better, being able to harvest the bits between them and the kit bash so seamlessly, I think, but also because the price point is right. I think these are like 33 US for one of these boxes from most of the distributors that I've seen. So you could really pick up both an infantry and this cavalry set for less than the price of a lot of Games Workshop sets for systems like the Old World. So it's definitely something to think about. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic entry to the Oathmark range, and I'm excited to see what comes next. On that note, Northstar mentioned that in terms of upcoming releases, they have their heavy human infantry, which should be coming out a little bit later this year, so we'll take a look at those once they're out. But also, I think I'm safe to say anyway, that they said for Frostgrave, they're actually putting out a Cultists 3 set that they want to do in the styling of the Cultist 2 set, which has, I think, stronger options. The sculpting's a little bit tighter on the Cultist 2 set compared to the Cultist 1 set. So they want to put out a set in the style of the Cultist 1 set, but with all of the quality of the Cultist 2 set, and they're going to brand that as a Cultist 3 set. So stay tuned for that a little bit later this year as well. Lots of other review and hobby content in the meantime, guys. As ever, I appreciate you dropping by for this one, and until next time, happy gaming.